Okay.
I decided to do my persuasive speech on U.S. dependence on foreign oil. I'm going to start by asking a question. As the world's top oil consumer, how much of the consumption is the U.S. able to satisfy with its own resources, and how much is dependent on import oil in terms of percentage-wise? Well, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 2008, 57% was imported from overseas. Now, in terms of percentage, this is just over half. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look at it in terms of the breakdown, in terms of gallons and the amount, in dollars, it's a tremendous amount. So the purpose today is to persuade my audience that U.S. must find alternative sources of energy to meet the demand for foreign oil, or the high dependence. And here's just a figure which shows that we get our oil not from only well-known countries, but many unstable countries, such as Colombia, Nigeria, and others listed here. So we'll go over, I'll start by first going over the main problem, which is our heavy dependence on foreign oil. Then we'll take a look at the cause behind the problem, which is the tough governmental regulations along with American lifestyle. And lastly, the solutions, which are already out, such as biofuels, and which are, once perfected, would be even better. In the introduction, I mentioned that 57% is imported. And here's just a graph over the past 50 or 60 years. It shows that consumption has increased, but the production has decreased, thus leading to a net import increase. But after 2005, it starts to drop a little, which we'll get to in a minute why that is. Okay, so the main problem. Let's start by taking a look at the problem. The United States, which only accounts for 4% of the population, world's population, but accounts for nearly 25% of total petroleum use in the world, which is a very significant amount. U.S. consumed 19.1 million barrels per day in 2010, making it the world's largest consumer, and spent approximately $400 billion on imported oil in that year, which is more than $1 billion a day. This was by far the greatest amount spent by any other foreign country or any other country in the world. And here's just a figure representing the percentage. The nation's heavy dependence on imported oil for energy increases the vulnerability for the U.S. To economic and political positions in the world. Our heavy dependence has left us vulnerable to shortages of petroleum-based fuels due to natural disaster, political disruptions, as well as private volatility. Here's just a figure showing that many times within the past 20, 25 years, every time we have a war or any political problem, gas prices usually go high. During the summer of 2008, it went over $4 for the first time, which was due to the political tensions in the Middle East, as well as natural disasters. Okay. The increased consumption in fossil fuels also continues to add to the greenhouse gas emissions into the Earth's atmosphere. In 2010, the 5th U.S. Climate Action Report concluded, in assessing the current trends, the greenhouse gas emissions increased by 17% from 1990 to 2007. And the main factor for this was the carbon dioxide emissions, which was based on the combustion of fossil fuels, which increased 22% over that same 17-year period. Now, this increase in greenhouse gas emissions is directly related to global warming. And scientists believe that by 2050, if this trend continues to increase, or shows, that 15 to 35% of the 1,100 species studied will be at risk for extinction. This study was conducted by Dr. Chris Thomas, a conservation biologist at the University of Leeds in UK, along with 18 other scientists around the world. So now that we looked at the problem, let's take a look at what may cause what's the cause of this problem. And there are two main causes. First is the governmental regulations, which mean federal, state, and local. The federal government owns, and the Bureau of Land Management, along with other agencies, manages most of the land suitable for oil and gas development in the U.S. And additional 56 million acres is split in states to which private individuals own the surface right, but the federal government owns the subsurface mineral rights. So basically, government has control of all the lands which are suitable for either development or drilling, and do not issue permits for any of this. And most of these regulations are in place to basically protect the environment. Some statuses deal with oil and gas operations directly, while others are more generally concerned with protecting human health, air, land, water, and such things. Some of these agencies include CERCLA, which is commonly known as Superfund, and it provides a broad federal authority to respond directly to release or threatened release of hazardous substances that may endanger the environment. Another one is NEPA, National Environmental Protection Policy Act. And this image is just from the BP spill that everyone's familiar with, which occurred very recently. Additionally, we already have regulations in place, but there's new pending legislations, these are now state and local, which are in place, which would also prevent the drilling. For example, New Jersey has 2 legislations in place. The first one bans offshore drilling in state waters and prohibits the Department of Environmental Protection from issuing permits. And the other one urges complete stoppage of offshore drilling for oil. South Carolina has very similar bills, and along with Florida and Virginia. Okay, so now that we've seen the first main cause, we'll look at the second main cause, which is heavy reliance, which is due to the American lifestyles, and specifically transportation. Transportation sector includes all the models of transportation, from public vehicles such as cars to public transportation such as buses, trains, airplanes, and such things. In the United States, we spend 28% of our total energy to move people from one place to another, and nearly 70% of all this is used by petroleum or provided by petroleum. Based on a national study, on average, each household owns average of 2.28 cars, but over 35% own 3 or more. Scott Waldron, president of Experian Automotive, said, "It's obvious that regardless of where they live or what they earn, Americans place a high value on owning vehicles and having at least 2 in their garage." Now, some people may think that public transportation such as airplanes, trains, buses would consume most of the energy used in the sector, but their percentage is very small, 9% for airplanes and 3% for trains and buses. On the other hand, personal vehicles such as cars account for more than 60% of the consumption in this sector. Over the past century, dependence on vehicles burning petroleum-based fuels has become a defining component of the American lifestyle. In fact, the U.S., which was made up of less than 5% of the world's population, is home to a third of the world's total automobiles. In 2007, automobiles, motorcycles, trucks, and buses drove nearly 3 trillion miles in this country, which is equivalent to driving to the sun 16,000 times and back. And to add to that, over the next 20 years, the total number driven is projected to grow by 40%, thus leading to an increased demand for fuel. Now that we have seen the several causes, let's consider possible solutions to this demanding problem. Solution to this main problem is the use of biofuel. Now there's basically 2 categories, first generation and second generation. The first generation includes bioalcohols, which is ethanol, propanol, butanol, and such things. There's also biodiesel and vegetable oil. But the most important one is the second generation biofuel. Now the first generation are already in place, but the second generation are still under development. The second generation biofuels are produced by sustainable feedstock, either in the forest or out in the field. And of these, the most common ones are lignocellulosic. And these are derived from non-food crops or inedible waste products such as citrus peels or sawdust. And thus, they do not divert food away from the animal or human food chain. Again, lignocelluloses, the term comes from lignin cellulose, which are sugars basically found in wood or any plant material, along with hemicellulose. This feedstock is abundant and diverse, but getting ethanol from this is a very complicated process, which is still to be solved. It has the potential to supply a considerable proportion of low-cost fuel transport if cost-effective methods are discovered to where conversion is very easy. Once harvested, lignocellulose undergoes pre-treatment to facilitate the conversion from the sugars to the biofuel. One reason why I decided to do this topic was last semester I had an internship and I got to work with Richard Giles. He's a PhD student in biology department under Dr. Perro, and he's actually working on developing a method for this enzymatic conversion. And here's a paper he published last year or the year before that, and this just talks about one of the methods that he uses in lab. It talks about hydrolyzing wood via enzymes, which will separate the sugars out that are composed, such as lignin, cellulose, and hemicellulose. In lab, we worked on basically small-scale models using just small test tubes and whatnot. But once this method is perfected, it can be used on large scales to produce biofuel from basically wood. Okay, so some of the benefits for these second-generation biofuels. Biofuels can provide a great number of environmental advantages over the conventional fossil fuels, most noticeably the reduce in greenhouse gas emissions. The first generation has the potential to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 52%, and according to CONCAWE, which is a small group of leading oil companies which carries out research about the environment and the effects fossil fuels has, they estimated that once the method is perfected, it will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 90%, the second generation ones. Additionally, the fossil fuel inputs required in the life cycle from feedstock production to end is less than required for petroleum-based fuels, and so it will reduce dependence on foreign oil as well as the cost in the same stroke. In 2006, U.S. produced nearly 5 billion gallons of ethanol, which reduced the dependence by 170 million barrels, valued at more than $11 billion. And that figure that I put up on the fourth slide, after 2005, where it started to decrease, it was because of this, the first generation ethanol production. In 2007, ethanol industry helped create more than 230 jobs in all sectors of the economy, boosted household income by $12.3 billion, and also added an estimated $4.6 billion in federal taxes, as well as $3.6 billion in local and state taxes. So the use of alternative fuels such as biofuels provides many benefits collectively, such as reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, saving the country money, and also providing jobs. To conclude, I've described why the United States' heavy dependence on foreign oil is a major problem which needs to be addressed. Then I stated possible solutions, or then I stated the causes, which are the tough governmental regulation along with the American lifestyle, and lastly, the solutions, the first generation, which are already in place, as well as the second generations, which once perfected, would tremendously help. And just end with a quote. According to R. James, who is the director of the CIA, the basic insight is to realize that global warming, the geopolitics of oil, and the warfare in Persian Gulf are not separate problems, but they're the aspect of a single problem, the West's dependence on oil.
Any questions?